I practiced a number of times doing this, and it came out different every time. So I have no idea what I'm going to say to you. But I thought what I would start with is to tell you why I'm actually here. And you don't know. You don't even know. It's a kind of a weird story. So, yes, I am a marriage and family therapist. I practiced for a while, and then I realized that prevention is really my thing. And so throughout the rest of my time, after I stopped actually doing practice, I've been preventing various things, as you can tell. And I always have these ideas going. Right? There's always, oh, we should do this, we should do that. And they're all a little bit out there and way too much work, and none of them have ever happened, really. But I had this idea a couple of years ago, and it's a great idea. I know it's a great idea because it's going to happen. There should be an app, I thought, not just for my husband. Where if there's an anniversary coming up, or I want to do something where like, we need to be a little closer, right? Like, there should be a list of hundreds of things that you could do for or with your partner. And you should be able to kind of go, yeah, oh, that one. And then there should be a scheduler that gives you reminders that tells you what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and then tells you like good job, and it has fireworks and all that kind of thing. Shouldn't there be an app like that, right? Like, okay, awesome. And even better, because I'm a therapist and I can't help it, that app should then also say to my husband when he says, sunflowers, do you want to level up? Of course he's going to say yes. So it says, put a note with the flowers. Good app, right? Like, oh, note with the flowers. All right, yeah, that's even better. And then it says, you want to level up again? Write in the note something personal and specific about your partner that you really admire. Oh, like, yeah, good. So we took something that's fairly normal and we taught them a little bit. Do that enough times with a person, not just men, and they'll learn. They'll learn to have things be more meaningful and more powerful. Okay, so it's a great idea. And then I was like, I'm going to build an app. I've done a website. I can do, no. You can't. I looked into it. It takes at least 2 years of intensive training in order to be able to build yourself an app. Like, I couldn't do it, so I gave up, and I was a little bit sad. But like I said, this happens a lot, so it wasn't such a big deal. But I was a little bit sad because I really wish we had that app in my life. I have a great husband who's a psychologist, so he lets me tease him like that, and he understands. And then a couple of months later, after I had given up, this person that I kind of knew and I hadn't spoken to in 9 years is on Facebook and says, would you take this survey about the 5 love languages? And I'm like, sure. That's kind of my thing, right? Relationships. But you're a lawyer. Why are you sending out a survey about something that has nothing to do with your job? And so after I took the survey, I said, hey, what's up? What are you doing? And he says, actually, I have this idea. There should be an app. And he said everything that I just told you, well, sort of. And I was like, shut up, that's my idea. It's like, well, I'm starting a business with this other person who can build apps. I was like, shut up, that's so awesome, I hope you get to do it. And he's like, well, you know, the 5 love languages is like, well, you can't, you're a lawyer, you can't rip off the 5 love languages, you know better. Like, that's not something that's okay. Plus, and then I went off, like, the 5 love languages is great, but it's one little tiny aspect of what makes relationships really wonderful. And if you want to cover getting relationships to be really wonderful, the thing you need to do, blah, 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 blah. And a few blah, blahs later, he was like, would you join our team? I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. I've already got 100 things written down. Like, I started working on it, of course. So there I am, and I'm all excited, and that's great. So we get up to 600 ideas, and the app guy's starting. And then my partner says, what we really need is a profile. He's still in 5 love languages land, but that's a powerful part of 5 love languages where you take a little test, your partner takes a test, you all understand each other better. Great. And I said, well, since we're not ripping off the 5 love languages, it's much more integrated and holistic than that. There's a lot more aspects that are to it. And if it's just a list of things to do, then I don't have to be that specific. But what you're asking for is a profile people are going to identify with. It needs to be based on research. So what we need to do is find the universal theory of relationship awesomeness. Okay? And he was like, well, go ahead, don't you know that? Like, you're trained as a therapist. There is no universal theory of relationship awesomeness. I looked into it. What it is most people like to study relationship satisfaction. That's not the same thing. Satisfaction goes down when you get married. Why? Because you're doing meaningful, hard things. And satisfaction depends on what you had for lunch. You're like, no, I don't feel satisfied when I bring my baby. I mean, sometimes, but really. And joy is completely different, as is meaning, as is connection, as is your marriage can actually do the things that marriages need to do. And so I'm kind of saying, look, people haven't, I found out, studied in depth the good marriages. We've studied in depth how not to get divorced. Thank you, John Gottman. We've studied in depth what makes you happy, satisfied, feeling good when you're married or not married or whatever. But those give weird results. We haven't really studied. Some people have. I found them. They are now our gurus. But not a lot of people study deeply fulfilling, long-lasting, connected, meaningful marriages that are resilient, that are, I mean, I could go on. So because there does not exist a universal theory of relational awesomeness, I had to go invent one. Which is, you know that part of you that says, like, I can't even believe those words are coming out of your mouth. You are so not qualified to even say that in front of people. That's happening right now with me. So my cheeks are getting red. Like, I really am embarrassed about this. I'm not the person to do this. I'm not a researcher. I'm a helper, a disseminator of information. That's what I do. But okay, great. I took it upon myself and I did it. I was like, great. There's 5 pillars. These are categories. Like, there's all these little things that go with that. Like, I did it. I took the scientific research. Everybody else stopped. Thankful for that. Of their work on the app and the business and whatever. And I took months and months and months. And I worked really hard and I read everything I could find. And I did it. And I put it into a universal theory. And I was going, December, we're going to present this in the big company meeting. Well, there's 3 of us. But in the big company meeting, I'm presenting my theory. But because this is a universal theory, not every aspect of it has been studied very well. So I'm finding that there's things like non-sexual touching in a romantic relationship and how that builds connection. Nobody's studied that. So I'm sort of scrabbling to find information about some of these things. Well, I pull one of my sex therapy books off the shelf as we were walking out the door to go on our trip to Utah to have Christmas and to have this meeting. And I figured, well, I'll just pull some. Right. So I was like, well, the sex therapist might know something about, I mean, I can extrapolate out. Like, was that called pulling at straws or grasping at straws? Yeah. Something's got to be in there because we can't have the pillars be like full and awesome and gratitude and, all these things and then like touch, right? And I start reading the book and it has a few good ideas, but as I'm reading, I'm like, oh. And my husband, the psychologist, is driving the car next to me going, oh no, what? Like, you're reading a sex therapy book? And I keep hearing you say, oh, and I was like, well, honey, there's this thing. He keeps talking about this theory. I need another pillar. I realized I had left a complete, very important section out of my universal theory. And I'm about to present in 3 days, and you know how we do that, right? It was fine. I skimmed the book, I put it in, I presented, and of course the app guy and the lawyer guy are like, oh, yeah, no, that's good. And I go, it's not. Like, I didn't do it right. So January, we get back, and I start reading the book again in depth, and I have indeed, they didn't even teach it to us in therapy school. What kind of a school is BYU that they missed? Like, I'm going to give it to you really fast because next week is actually when we're going to talk about this in depth. But basically, this is how it goes. A long time ago, therapists were helping couples who were struggling, and they noticed that there was a lot of fighting going on. Good noticing, guys. And they said, it's communication problems. People are not using their communication skills properly. So the therapist started teaching people communication skills. And then John Gottman came along. Who's heard of John Gottman? Yeah, okay. So he was revolutionary, and the reason he was revolutionary is he said, this isn't going to work, this communication thing you've got, until, it's called the marital house, right? Until you put in a foundation of friendship. If you're not friends, if you don't know each other very well, and you don't like each other very much, you're not going to be able to communicate, which makes complete sense. But nobody had thought of that. Okay, thank you. So he's got this marital house, and the foundation is friendship, and that's really important. We had that part. Most textbooks nowadays do. He's been around for a while. What David Schnarch, or Schnarch, depending on who you are and how you say that. I can't say Schnarch, so I'm sorry, it's probably a mispronunciation. What this text therapist had brought into it was Murray Bowen's theory, which basically says, underneath that friendship is the bedrock of having a really strong sense of self and the ability to act with integrity. If two human beings cannot do that, you can't build the friendship, and you can't communicate. And then the roof of the house is have hopes and dreams together. The rest of the house falls apart, including the friendship, if each person involved doesn't have that strong sense of I am who I am, and I'm going to act with integrity. It's blowing my mind as I'm on the way to Utah. It's like, that's so true. And I'm reading 400 pages about why that's true and how that's true. And I'm kind of explaining it to my, anyway. We'll talk about all of that next week. It's going to be great. But then in January I get home and I start reading it again, and I literally had this moment where I was like, oh crap. I can't just read this and understand it. I can't teach it to other people unless I do it. But it's hard. And the book talks about how hard it is. And it's scary. And the book, you think having integrity wouldn't be hard and wouldn't be scary, but it is. And we'll talk about that. It's hard and it's scary, and I know it's going to be hard and scary. And so in January, my own sense of whatever integrity I have kicks in, and I have to try this. And so I do, and it's hard. And it's scary, and I struggle, and I'm failing a lot. And that's okay. And then a few weeks ago, I realized I don't have a strong enough internal sense of self to be able to do these things that I'm trying to do. I need to get in touch with my own worth. And where in the heck does worth come from anyway? And it frustrated me, and it was just frustrating and overwhelming, and I kind of tried not to think about it. And then some really nice lady from Rolling Hills Ward called me up and said, I'd like you to come and speak to us about nothing to do with self-worth, guys. And I said, everything you're telling me about really is rooted in self-worth, and I think I need to talk about that. And then she said, there's this podcast I was listening to, and you should go listen to it. I listened to it. Guys, Jennifer Finlayson-Five's podcast that started this whole thing, she quotes the book. Like, God did this. He brought me here to learn something, because her podcast brings in an LDS perspective and sort of helps solidify a few things. And then having to prepare this for you guys, I was like, oh, it's all coming together. I'm understanding it, I'm doing this. So it's really completely selfish that I'm here. God did this for me, and I'm so appreciating you coming and putting up with what's going to happen today. That's a really long story to tell you why we're here, but I think you need to understand where we're at. So I want you to please raise your hand and say that doesn't make any sense. Because this is the first time I've ever spoken it out loud to a group of people and tried to teach it, because it blew my mind just a couple months ago, right?
Makes perfect sense.
Good, so far. We haven't gotten into it yet. So yes, say that too if it does. And then also, if ideas pop into your head, really raise your hand and give thoughts and say, I don't think that's right, and we'll talk about it and stuff, because this is me sort of processing along with you guys as I share. And thank you for being so understanding about that. Okay, so everything I'm presenting today is thanks to David Schnarch, Jennifer Finlayson-Five. I brought in Brene Brown. Who's heard of Brene Brown? Good. She is a really good, they're both sex therapists. That's not what you're here for. So I brought Brene Brown in to kind of make it apply to individual humans and not be quite so whatever it is. So thanks to them, thanks to Brene Brown, and then I tried to bring in all the gospel perspective too. I collected so many quotes for today, and I was going to print them all out and hand them out. We don't have time to read the quotes that I collected. So I'm going to rely on you guys also to say, I have this insight, I really remember this conference talk, I remember this scripture, this applies here. I'm relying on the Spirit to do that because there's just too much. I need to just cover the basic ideas so that we all understand them. And then I encourage you, if you want to dig deeper, to please do ask me. I'm happy to share like other places that you can go to learn some more. So, we got it? We're good? Am I still okay? Okay,
Great.
so let's dig in and please ask lots of questions and all that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm deciding about chalkboard. I'm going to say this part, no. We're going to start with basic human development stuff, just because it's necessary to understand what we're talking about next. So I'm going to move back and forth, I hope that's okay. There's a continuum, and when we're born, we come into this world 100% completely self-obsessed. You ever had a baby? They're not thinking about anybody but themselves. I have a baby. He thinks everything in this world was invented so he could put it into his mouth. It's kind of true. Including me. That self-focus, that 100% like I am the center of the universe-ness is unusual and not good in an adult, but it's fine in a baby. That's how they come. But they very quickly, at about 2 months or so, they start being like, oh, other person, me, we're separate, we're different, and I'm starting to recognize that, and they start to touch your face a little bit, and they start, and then as we move, they, 2-year-olds, you start getting a little bit of that, oh, other people have feelings. Who knew? And I can manipulate those feelings. Terrible twos, right? And then they get a little older and their focus starts to sort of blossom outward. So then there starts to be other people. But then my 6-year-old not only understands that there's other people, but he gets that his teacher needs to be responded to differently if we see her in the grocery store as opposed to when she's administering a test at school. So situations start to be meaningful. And his perspective is broadening out. It's not just self-focused and other-focused, it's situation-focused. And he's even beginning, as we get a little older, we start to realize that relationships themselves actually need focus. Not just you and me, but there's an us in there that has to be nurtured. Or it doesn't work, it doesn't exist. That's a little bit more complex. And then we get to be in junior high and in high school and we realize that there's values in this world and that I need to keep those in mind as I approach situations. And then society comes in, the they, right? Our focus as we grow up, we get better and better at having this integrated focus. I still exist, I'm still important, but you exist and you're important, and we exist and we're important, and the situation and the world and all of that. So your focus and perspective broaden out. That's part of growing up. Awesome. Paradoxically, as infant humans, it's all about me, but there isn't really a me. What we brought with us is sort of cut off. We don't have access to it anymore because of the veil. So there's no I coming from that. And everything we know about ourselves comes from other people and how they respond to us. I know where I belong. I know whether or not I'm a good person. All of the things I know about myself as an infant absolutely 100% depend on how people are responding to me. Not just what they say, but facial expressions and body language, like they're very keyed into that. It works really well to create a family or a society. I really believe that that's a gift, not a bad thing. But as we grow up, one of the things that we need to learn to do is stop having our sense of self be a reflection from other people and start developing a self for ourselves, an inner core self that that can withstand other people in some senses. And again, we get into the terrible twos, and you get into that mine. And I want to dress myself, and I have a self. Good job. Stop being annoying. This is really hard. But that's what it is. Like, the self is coming out. It takes a little bit of pushing and negotiating for people to figure out, little humans. I have a me, but my me, I'm still narcissistic, kind of, right? I need to assert myself, and we all have kind of seen that, right? And then we move on, and we get better and better and better. Hopefully by junior high and high school we start to have a strong enough sense of personal selfness that it can, that all the pressures that start to happen don't, I mean, they still impact us, but that we can still hold on to who we are in the face of them. And that's part of growing up as well. Okay. Was any of that unclear?
No.
Okay, good. So we used to believe as psychology people that adult brains stopped growing. That you would get to 18 or 21 or 25 and your brain stopped. And you had attributes and you had ways of thinking and you like skills you had developed and good for you, but don't try to learn anything or change anything after that. And the adults just kind of keep going on the same forever. Well, we were wrong. Turns out the human brain is actually very growable, and the term they use is plastic, which means malleable and moldable. So not only can we change and grow after we become adults, we have to. If we stop changing and growing, the result is usually anxiety, depression, and crisis. Think of a midlife crisis. That's kind of what that is. You stopped, somebody, as adults, we kind of stop becoming more than we are. We stop stepping up in the face of whatever we decide we're going to step into, right? We stop becoming, and then we become sad, or we go into crisis and start doing weird things. There's an innate human need to continue to grow. And you can learn tap dancing when you're 80. That's actually not what I'm talking about. Like, do learn when you're whatever. Not just new skills, but it's basically a self-makeover continuously. How can I be more than I am? And one of the things we're going to talk about next week is that unfortunately, and very fortunately, and unfortunately, I'm really ambivalent about this, relationships are actually great machines for putting us in a position where we have to grow, where we're stuck unless we grow. And that's really frustrating because usually I know who needs to grow and it's not me. And I know that the problem is not me, and the person or thing that needs to change is not me. And next week we're going to talk about how that's not true.
But that's next week.
That's next week.
For another 7 days.
I am dreading next week because it's harder. This is going to be a great talk this week, so enjoy it. Okay, so it's going to be more personal too, which is not always my favorite. Sorry. Okay, so adults, we need to keep growing. Otherwise, there's some pretty dire consequences. And what that looks like is a little fuzzy, because it needs to be, because all of us grow differently, and what we bump up against is different, and what we choose is different. And so I can't really say, and this looks like that, you have to have a career, you have to do this, or you have to, I don't know what you're stuck up against. But I do know that becoming more than you are is probably going to be part of the answer, which I hate. And I'm getting over slowly. Okay, so we go from self-focused to integrated focus. As an adult, we would think that when I'm sitting there with my friend and we're sipping lemonade and the trees are rustling and we're having a good time, I'm really pretty good at integrated focus. I can think about world hunger, and I can absolutely bring my values into the conversation, whatever. The problem with being an adult is that there's another thing about being human. Has anybody ever had a severe physical injury, not wanting to relive trauma, Sorry. Yes. So in the moment of that injury, were you solving world hunger? No. Were you thinking about your ministering that you needed to do and who you could serve and what were you thinking about?
Like when I broke my ankle, I was holding my baby.
Oh,
So my thought as I went to the ground was protect him.
that's so good of you. You are a good adult.
And then I blacked out.
Okay.
And then I woke up with him patting my face.
Oh.
And then the stirring pain came.
And then when the pain came, what did your hands do?
Well, I comforted him.
You're such a good adult.
Somebody else.
What did you want to do?
What I want to do? I wanted the pain to go away.
Yeah. Usually when something like that happens, the first thing we do is focus entirely on whatever part of us is in pain. And a lot of times we want to grab it. You are so good. That's awesome. Because when we're in pain as humans, we go in. We focus inward. We focus on whatever the pain is. So emotional pain especially causes us to want to focus inward and stay there until the pain goes away. Well, the problem in our culture today is that the pain often doesn't go away. We have, as adults, prolonged experiences with difficult things, with anxiety, with frustration, with deprivation of one kind or another. And that pain that comes from that wants us constantly to be self-focused. That's normal and that's human. And as an adult, the the thing we do as we grow ourselves up is we get better and better at realizing my baby matters. My pain is horrible. I'm worried about the baby. That's awesome because that's an integrated focus. It's not just about me. Pain makes it just about me. That's normal, but it's not helpful. It is to a point, but then it's not helpful. And if you have something that's long-term, it's really not helpful. So we have to be able to grow ourselves into overcoming that tendency as adults, which is a hard thing to do because life keeps throwing harder and harder things at you. I don't know if there's a Carolyn Pearson poem about that, and she kind of is saying, you pass the test, whatever it is, and then God promotes you up a grade, so now you have a harder test that you're trying to tackle. And then you have to learn to do that, have that integrated focus in the harder test and the more distracting and more difficult situations. So we keep going through, and we think we're bad at it, but really God's just upping the difficulty. Keep that in mind. Okay, so as adults, that's the task, because we keep growing ourselves up, and none of us are done. Sorry, if you're done, I'm sorry. I'm glad, but I don't think any of us are done, because there's always more and more situations where we have to overcome that tendency to focus on ourselves. Okay, and then the other thing, that mirror, that reflected sense of self, as we grow up and become adults, we still battle having a reflected sense of self. I'll give you an example. Mommy, can we have cake for breakfast? No, honey, you can't have cake for breakfast. You're the worst mommy ever. I hate you. Okay. If I have a reflected sense of self, I have a problem because I am now the worst mommy ever. And there's moments when I'm not very resilient and it feels like that's very true. So I'm dealing with that reflection of myself and I have to handle it in that moment. Well, they're not the only people in the room. I have my mom on this shoulder and the pediatrician on this shoulder saying, no, cake for breakfast is a bad idea. So now I'm a bad person if I go with their idea of me because I don't give cake for breakfast, and I'm a bad person because I have these influences in my life saying, if you do give him cake for breakfast, then you are a bad mom. And we get into these situations, the reflected sense of self gets us into these situations. They're no win. You're always going to be bad. And the thing, we might get to this later, and if we don't, I really wanted to say it. The thing that I need to realize, you can realize too if you want, is usually when people are reflecting back to us, what they're really saying is, you're not doing what I want. Good example, 2016 election, somebody on I'm on Facebook a lot. I consider it part of my ministry as a human being to be a positive voice on Facebook. You do whatever you want. It's really annoying. I don't know why I do it. But anyway, So I'm on Facebook again, and people are throwing around the word sheeple. Mormons are just sheep. I was like, because what they're really usually saying is, you're not doing what I want. That has nothing to do with my core self. It's not like they sat down and thought about it and got to know me really well and they're giving me feedback. I'm just not doing what they want. Oh, I can let that go. But it's hard. It still impacts you. It doesn't matter who says those things to you. Or even if it's your kids and you know that they love you and you're not the worst mom ever, like it still feels really hurtful. So how do I develop a strong enough core sense of self that I can deal with all that reflected sense of self coming at me all the time? And it gets really difficult the closer in proximity you are. So the more you open up to somebody, the more vulnerable you are with them, the more you develop, like the real intimacy, not using it as a euphemism, the more connected you are, the bigger impact they have, the more push and shove you get from them, and the more it feels like they're being controlling often. And the more the reflection means, and the harder it is to be on your own 2 feet in the face of that kind of thing. That's really difficult. So then I come to my question a few weeks ago. I'm not good enough at this. I'm failing pretty consistently at these 2 things. Keeping my focus not just on myself, and keeping it integrated, and standing on my own 2 feet in the face of, and having a self that isn't pushed about by everybody else's opinions or thoughts. That's what we're going to answer today. That was a really long introduction, but that's what we're going to talk about now. Where does that worth come from? Where does that strength of self come from? That's a really, really important question. Any questions up to now? I know I just keep talking, I'm not asking for feedback, so if you have an idea or a thought, please do raise your hand and share it. Okay, then we're just going to push on. Is this okay? Okay, we're all together? Okay. So that's becomes a really, really, really super important question if I'm going to be able to live my life and be an adult, which is a goal of mine, eventually. How do you do it? Well, it occurs to me that there's actually 2 sources of worth. We're going to tackle that. And the one that I want to tackle first is that innate sense of worth that is part of being a human and doesn't change. We need to watch our little video at this point. Oh, slowly pan. Should have given you some warning. Think how I can remember. I am not acting out the video if you can't remember.
You are perfect. You are beautiful. You are brave. It's gonna be okay. Can you show me your video? You are so brave. You are loved exactly the way you are. Let's see if you can one more. You are strong.
Hello. Did you check into the bed? I love you.
You are resilient. You are so beautiful. You are a child of God. And you are enough.
Okay, so the church said that out, have you cry every time. But what are they saying? What's the message there, other than you are enough? Like, sweet of them, but what are they, why? Like, what's the... What are they trying to get across with all those pictures and all those things?
No matter what you do, no matter what you're involved in, no matter what your life circumstances are,
You're enough. Yeah. Why?
I just think it's interesting. It seems to suggest that like your worth comes from like you independently, unless like as you're saying that it's not a reflection from what other people are telling you. They're all saying like you're like resilient, that your worth is defined in you alone and not in what other people or the other feedback you might get.
What's with the babies?
Babies love you.
Isn't that so sweet of them?
Yes.
Not all of them do. I have a niece who hated everybody. But yeah, most of the time.
But probably not her mom.
Sometimes. She's a tough nut to crack, but we love her.
I just can't get away from the divine worth, the divine integrity we are, children of God, that we come with value. It's not something we earn or develop or learn, it's something we are. It's something that we have then and we have now. It's easier to see it in the pure form of babies and children because their light is so bright. It is undeniable, their purity and their strength, and when we take the moment to look at it. But then as adults, it gets easy to cloud that over and be like, oh, you're not pure anymore, you're not a clear vessel. But we are the same. We are still that creature, we are still that same being.
Absolutely. And I think they were really trying to say a lot of that is they're starting with the babies. And have you ever held a baby and looked into their eyes and said, you are a piece of garbage? Can you imagine that reaction? What was that?
I've said some things to my baby that I regret. Not in so many ways, but
I call them names all the time. That is affectionate, is not the same.
in the morning.
That's not really.
You're a little turkey and I wish you'd go to sleep is not the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're good.
Can you imagine ever saying that to a baby? And how would you know the garbage ones from the good ones? Like you can't, every single baby is this precious, wonderful. And we have a gut reaction to that idea. That if I actually did that, most of you would call somebody, right? Like, we just...
Take the baby away from you.
Right! Because it's inherently, there's something inside each of us that knows that is not true. And it's not okay to treat that baby that way. Okay, so somebody, if you could, pass out our little tags. They're over there. In a little baggie on the piano. My daughter helped do them and she's 4 today. So if you get one like this one that maybe wasn't punched entirely properly, then that's okay, because we're talking about not having a perfectionistic way of approaching the world today. So on the little tag is the circle. And the circle represents that purity, that core, that self that we come with, that worth that every single one of us has. And the little squiggles around it that my daughter and my son drew for you, they represent all the gunk that gets attached to us before we're even able to think about it. I mean, think of all the reflecting that happens from infant all the way up to maybe 14, 15, 16. You can start to actually question the people around you and say, I'm sorry, what you're telling me about myself, that's complete bad stuff.
Hogwash.
Hogwash, there you go. Well, that hogwash sticks to us naturally, and if we embrace it, so try not to embrace it. But it sticks to us as we grow, and the more experiences you have, and especially if you have tough experiences, it tends to build up, and there's this pure center of worth that you can't see anymore because it's been covered up by gunk. That's part of mortality. I'm sorry. But I 100% believe that one of the most important things we can do in this mortal experience is learn to look through the gunk and actually see that part of ourselves that nobody can take away from us. We can't even take it away from us. I could make all the worst choices. I could be Hitler, and I would still have the pure, beautiful core of worthiness. Now, he covered his up with a whole lot of his own gunk, and I don't know if he can find it. I don't think he could, but that's my opinion. The point is, no matter what choices we make, no matter who dumps us, no matter who betrays us, no matter what happens to us, no matter what we end up looking like or acting like, this is intact. You can't ruin it, and you can't get rid of it. Every baby has it. Every person has it. I feel strongly that this is the case. And think of all the conference talks you've ever heard that talk about how your worth is innate and all of those things. They're not wrong, but they don't usually talk about the gunk. On the other side of your, this is a merchandise tag. You can use it as a bookmark. You don't have to put it on yourself and walk around. You're welcome. Have you ever walked into a store and seen a piece of merchandise with a tag that says "as is"? What does that mean?
So broken.
Means there's some flaws.
There's some flaws. What else does it mean?
Someone returned it?
It means you can't return it.
No warranty.
There's no guarantees of anything. It is what it is. One of the thing that I'd like to walk away from tonight with is an absolute assurance from me that Heavenly Father, and I think our Heavenly Parents in general, and their Son, made a big sacrifice to redeem us as is. They know better than we do what this is, what the worth is. Most of us don't really know what it is. We haven't seen it, we don't understand it, and I am trying really hard to get in touch with it. I can't even communicate about it. I wanted to stand up here and say, these are all here's 12 adjectives, and I can't. I know it exists, and I felt it a little bit, but I can't even talk about it. I think it's extremely personal. And I think everybody has to go on this quest alone with help of your Heavenly Father to find it and to feel it and to get in touch with it. And I can't give you guideposts for that one. But Heavenly Father knows what it is. And He chose to redeem us, each and every one of us, as is. He also knows about our gunk. All the flaws that make it so that we're not the perfect thing that everybody would want. I love Isaiah. Sorry, everybody hates Isaiah. At least Isaiah 53. When it talks about Jesus Christ having no beauty that anyone would desire Him, I really identify with that. I feel that aspect of being in mortality and trying to do something and not having whatever it is, charisma, or God knows what's in there. He knows about the gunk on the outside just as well as we do, in fact, probably better. He also knows about our potential, that as we're striving to grow ourselves up, what that I need to be more than I am, what that actually is. God knows and understands that, and He redeemed us anyway. As is, all of it, together. That is not something that any of us can walk away from once we understand it. Worth, in some ways, is innate, inherent, untouchable, and unbreakable. God knows that, and He chose every single one of us to be redeemed. I knew I was gonna cry. So, that's one aspect of worth. And I encourage all of us to continue on that quest, to find it, to get through the gunk and find it. Because I don't think any of us really understand what's in there. I could just say right now. But I can't, because there's this other aspect of worth that's also really, really important. What I don't want is for any of us to fall into the trap, and we wouldn't, but we all know people, or think we know people, who are kind of clinging to the idea that there's this innate sense of worth in myself, and I'm, by definition, wonderful, and you should all treat me that way, and I deserve certain things because I am wonderful, and then they get angry when nobody really thinks they're wonderful or respects them the way that they want to be respected. This is why I don't wear makeup, because I cry. And we need to deal with that aspect of worth as well. So the other side of worth has to do with esteem, respect. If I am going, I like the word esteem. I don't like the word self-esteem. It's way overused and doesn't mean anything anymore. But what does it mean to really esteem someone? Is there yes?
Value them.
Yeah, to really think well of them and value them and their contribution and who they are. If I'm going to be able to have a sense of self-esteem, really value my own self, I need to have integrity. I'm sorry. A lot of us really worry about whether or not other people like us. Oh, that's natural, right? Like we're coming, reflected sense of self is still happening. And that's normal. People who don't worry about what other people think are called sociopaths. They tend to have a really difficult time in life. I'll leave that. So it's okay to worry what other people think. But that's really a path to disconnection, and it's a path to struggle and to problems, because what happens is that I worry about what you think of me, and then I start twisting myself into pretzels to please you. Start bending over backward. Now, pleasing other people is not a bad thing, but if I absolutely can't live without doing it, I'm in trouble. So, how do I develop that kind of worth that I do have to earn? Not from other people, but from myself. How do I develop my own self-respect? That's a really big deal, because that's part of being able to stand up to my kids when they tell me I'm a bad mom, and to other people when they start saying you didn't do what I want and all of that stuff. That self-respect is actually really, really important. And we're going about it mostly the wrong way, at least I am. So here we run into Brene Brown. One of the things that she does is she quotes Jung. Carl Jung's one of the founders of psychology. He's a great guy, and he liked like symbols. So if you're into poetry and like read Jung, he's awesome. But one of the things that he talked about is that shame and despair and all of these other things he called the swampland of the soul. That sounds so like him. But I think swampland is actually a really good metaphor, because most of us, including me, have a tendency to stand on the edge of shame or difficult things and not want to be in the swamp and not want to have anybody see that we're anywhere near the swamp. I don't have a swamp. Don't look at the swamp. And we put on faces and we pretend, we perform in certain ways and we do certain things because it's shameful to have shame, right? Right? But we all have it. We're all standing on the edge of the swamp going, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong. Actually, there's 3 different things that people tend to do when they're standing on the edge of the swamp, or they've got 2 feet in and they're pretending. We tend to either put up a front and perform, do what we think other people will like, and it looks good. We also have a tendency, and we all do all of them, but we all have a favorite. Some of us hide. Just throw a blanket over my head and not acknowledge anything, the swamp or anyone else. Like, I absolutely do that. Or numb. Okay, so everybody think of your own personal favorite taking the edge off of my negative feelings thing that you do. Mine's food. My husband's is TV. I don't watch TV with him anymore. I'm gonna discourage that. But we all have stuff that we do to manage, right? Okay, that's normal. It's also not helpful. So we hide, we perform, and then some people lash out at other people. So we blame, we shame another person. So when I feel shame, now I pass that on to somebody else. Dump that feeling instead of feeling it. We're so good at being angry at other people for our problems, right? That's really normal too. None of those things is helpful. We all do, probably all of them at some points in our lives. How do you get out of that? Well, courage, compassion, and connection. According to Brene Brown, who's studied this like nobody else, what you have to do, what I have to do, is grab somebody's hand and walk into the swamp. You have to go through it. And that's terrifying for most of us. Because those feelings of shame or despair or frustration or whatever we think of, whatever we're up against, are we're not supposed to feel like, you know, all the reasons why that's hard. Okay, so the courage is to take that first step and actually go in. The courage is also not to stay there. Some of us set up camp there, and that's easy to do too, is you sort of sink into the mud and cuddle with it, and your shame and your difficult stuff just starts to become a part of everything you do, and we've all been there. The courage is also taking the next step and the next step until you can get through the experience, feel it, experience it, and keep going. Compassion is self-compassion at first, because all of us are human and none of us have what it takes. And all of us, compassion actually comes from the Latin roots of to suffer and with another person. And that's why it's so scary, because I'd rather do the compassion where I'm the healer and I come into your sad little life and I say, oh, I know, and I'm so sorry. And I'm going to make you feel better, and I have compassion for you, and I'm going to help you. I'm good at that one. That's not what they're talking about. Compassion is suffering with, so it's actually like slogging down into the mud with somebody and having an experience together, that you're the hand, right? And you're going together. When we do that, okay, so now we're going to talk about, there's so many things that are so important, I wish I could tell you more about. Weathering your head. The first place that compassion needs to happen is in our own minds. And we're really bad at that very often. You've all heard this lecture before, but think about it for a second as weather. If you're out in a blizzard or you're out in a lightning storm, how much growing and adventuring and becoming more than you are you going to be able to do? If the weather in your own head is really nasty, that's a skill, calming your storms. And if you didn't learn it as much as a child as you needed to, and there's lots of reasons why we don't, keep practicing, because it's a skill you can learn, the weather in your head, to change it and calm that storm down. And isn't there somebody who is good at calming storms that can probably help? Another thing we need to do is make sure that we don't have a Zeus in our head with the lightning bolt, the smite button. Like, my little poor self wants to go out the door and grow myself up to become more than I am, and I put my foot out the door and there's a smite lightning bolt coming right down and saying, well, who do you think you are? And this is in my own head, and I try and go out. It's like Donald Duck, you know, when the lightning comes. It's like, why did you even think that was stupid, you know? And that smiting of ourselves constantly, we need to stop that, because there's no way you can grow yourself up in that environment. So, we need to work on the weather in our heads. That's compassion. Compassion is how to do that. And then as we go through the swamp, courage, compassion, and connection. If I can speak these things to another person who deserves to hear them, you can't just randomly talk. You need to find somebody you trust that can be with you and hold on and not do that, oh, I'm so sorry, you have problems. Not that person. Connection frees us from the shackles of shame in a way that is so powerful, and I wish you could all read the book and know how. So courage, compassion, connection get us through the swamp of all those difficult things that we have to manage. When we get to the other side, guess what the prize is? Courage, compassion, and connection. As you do it, every time you go through that swamp, you increase those things in your life and you get to do more of them. And they're not bad prizes. All of that lays the foundation for what we're going to talk about very briefly. So, this is Brene Brown's guidepost. What she did is she did research on shame, and she was trying to figure out who, you'll all get one, who can make it through the swamp and who can't. If you asked me as a human being, not as a therapist, I would be like, well, okay, who can make it through that swamp? I would say maybe it's like the rich people can make it through the swamp because they have a lot more resources than I do, and they probably have less swamp, right? That's not what she found. And maybe it's like the good-looking people can make it through the swamp because everybody helps them. Have you noticed? That's not what she found either. Maybe it's the people with lots of social support, lots and lots of friends, lots of family that loves them. They don't have shame problems. They're really resilient. They can make it through the swamp just fine. That's not what she found either. She was shocked by what she found, and she stopped doing research for 2 years and saw a therapist to figure out what in the world her problem was, that she didn't want to handle the two things that she found. She found that the people who make it through the swamp, the people who are resilient in the face of all of this stuff, and who have a core that they can hold on to and develop themselves into wonderful people and whatever, the only difference was that they believed wholeheartedly that they were worthy of love and belonging. We just talked about that. They found that core. They found that inner self that is pure and worthy no matter what. And they were in touch with it. The other thing that she found that helped with resilience was a connection to something bigger than yourself. Spirituality. Not religion, religion's fine. But spirituality, a deep connection to something bigger than you are. Those are the two things that we cultivate in order to have that strength to be able to make it through the swamp. And avoid those things we were talking about, where we hide, or we attack, or we perform in order to not have to face it. These are her guideposts. And we're going to have to stop, but I'm giving them to you. I encourage you to pick one. They're in pairs. So we're letting go of what people think, and in order to do that, you're going to have to cultivate authenticity.